first jump. That was really my first jump into native plants, and it has been all about native plants ever since then. I was over at Saddleback. I was learning how to farm. I took every course that I could in plants in Saddleback, and then officially became accepted over at Cal Poly Pomona. I worked with the USDA and the CDFA on grants. I learned how to farm on organic and conventional land. I worked as a farmhand. I worked in a genetic seed lab. I was a plant pathology teaching assistant and arthropod or entomology teaching assistant, and really started to learn how the insects were such an important part of the biodiversity in the way we farm and the way we grow our food, and the way the whole system works together. At the very last semester of my research at Cal Poly, we had that little virus come along. I think we call it COVID. And that took everybody online, and that became a whole new challenge for how we would learn and how we would educate and communicate with each other. I started teaching classes to my nieces who were not being able to go into school anymore, and I was teaching them seed saving classes and propagation classes, sort of making my own little mini workshops. I started taking it was so stressful during COVID, and we all had this feeling of just not knowing, and this feeling of anxiety that was always kind of in the back of our minds. And I guess the way I dealt with that was to, on my Instagram reels, was to put quizzes and stories about plants and how do you grow this and how do you grow that, and can you propagate this seed in your kitchen? Can you make this grow into something you can eat? And I would do that daily, just to, I guess it helped relieve a little bit of the stress I had behind COVID. What was really cool is people started messaging me and saying, hey, you know what, you inspired me to start gardening, or you inspired me to try and plant something that I didn't think I could. I decided to start gardening with my kids. So I realized how much plants really just brings us together as a community through education. And it just really just gives us a purpose. Eventually I did graduate. This is my graduation picture. There was no ceremony. It was just a picture on the beach with my daughter. But it didn't make it any less sweet. I graduated with my master's in plant science and started working as the sales director over at Moosa Creek Nursery. I had an awesome opportunity to work on some science on a restoration job we were doing with the Torres Martinez Cahuilla Indian tribe, where we grew some of the native trees with a salinity treatment and some trees with an endophyte treatment that is supposed to make them be able to tolerate harsh conditions. And those of you who aren't familiar with the Salton Sea, the soil is extremely toxic and extremely salty, even more salty than the ocean water is. And unfortunately, with the drought, it's making the soil blow around, and it's become very toxic to the people living in the area. And the effects are felt all the way up to Los Angeles, all the way to Arizona. So it really is an ecological problem that needs to be dealt with. And unfortunately, not much has been done out there. And the Torres Martinez tribe took it upon themselves to start trying to restore their exposed playa in the area. So at Moosa Creek, we had the opportunity to grow those trees for them. And then we have ongoing research in the area right now to see which trees will survive under the different treatments that we gave them. So after collaborating with a NASA contractor, Intrinsic Environmental, they actually offered me a job that I couldn't refuse, to go work for them as an environmental scientist. And you can see my goofy picture there with my construction vest on. We're actually working on planting native grass. The trees are already planted in that area. It's been an ongoing project, but we are growing endophyte treated plants in an area on top of a toxic old gas refuel station. So there's actually petroleum in that soil, and it's also creating vapor and making it very toxic for the people in the area. So this is a biological way to help the issue there. And this cool photo here of the plants in the containers was taken a couple days ago at work. We're actually growing some plants in soil that is of the same chemical components that are in the soil on Mars. So I thought that was kind of fun, but you can see that they do have the plants, and they are surviving in there with the endophyte treatment. So hopefully that will, it really is just inspiring me to believe that trees can really affect the soil and the environment that we live within. So we're looking at spring right now. It's our time to plant. It's the second best time to plant natives. The first would be definitely more in the fall season, so you could take advantage of as much rain as we have during that time frame. But spring is still a great time to start planting natives and start getting them established before the weather turns warm again. It's also a great time to start taking cuttings of any plants that you're interested in trying to propagate. Now is a good time to do that. It's a good time to start wildflower seeds. If you have dead seed heads that you've left on your plants all winter long for the birds to eat, now you can trim those off and you'll start getting new growth coming back. What I really love about the spring is the nurseries are very challenged in the fall as far as the variety of plants that they can bring to market, because many of the plants aren't flowering in the winter time, but in the spring, you're going to see a really nice variety of flowering plants to choose from. There are other things that have happened this spring. You know, you can unmute yourself and holler one out, you know, if you've noticed some of the changes that have occurred. Our gas prices have gone up. Our food prices have gone up. We're definitely feeling the inflation. Water prices are going up. You know, these are a lot of things that create, again, that anxiety and uneasiness about what we can do with things changing as quickly as they are. You know, another thing is there's so much development going on in our communities that we're losing so much of our native plant habitat. There's biodiversity, we're losing that. With the development that we're doing with our new development, we're creating these sort of habitat islands, of which it's getting hard for pollinators and native species to find the plants that they need in order to survive, because we create these islands. So what I found that really planting within your own garden is really a solution to all of these issues. And let me explain why. By building these sustainable native habitats in our community, it gives us the opportunity to really bond as a community and educate ourselves. And I feel like whenever you are educating yourself and feeling like you're doing something good and giving back to your community, it just helps you feel better. It helps you feel like you're doing something. You know, we can't help what's going on the other side of the world, but we can help what's going on in our backyard, and we can help what's going on in our community. And what I just am so passionate about native plants is that it really targets all of these different components. By eliminating non-native species in your yard, you're eliminating the need for a lot of maintenance. You're eliminating the need to have to fertilize or use pest management. These things are all expensive. And when you start bringing your garden back to natives, you're going to see that these items aren't necessary in order to keep a healthy garden. whenever you plant natives, you're going to be reducing or eliminating water usage. Now, I'll tell you, I met a vineyard owner who bought a property in Central California, and he said he turned the water off completely, except for obviously on his vineyard. But he said if it doesn't survive living here without water, it doesn't belong here. And so he let everything die that didn't belong there. And he was surprised at how many plants were able to survive, you know, the hot summers that he experienced, and the natives were thriving. And I loved the idea about that. And that's exactly what I did in my own garden. I completely eliminated any irrigation. And my plants after establishment don't get any other supplemental water. And I sort of have that same opinion that if I have to water it, it probably doesn't belong in my yard. There are so many ways that you can conserve water. You can build swales in your yard. You can capture rainwater. There are things that you can do to conserve water. There are things that you can do to really create habitat for biodiversity. And one of those big things is to educate yourself on native plants. And we'll go into that a little bit more in the future. You know, gas prices are really expensive right now. So what I would recommend is that you go out and you just explore your local community. I bet you haven't explored all of the trails that are just in your local community, all the classes that you can go out and take just in your own little area. That has been one of the best parts about moving to San Diego County, is really all the amazing things that there were around me to explore, and all of the community involvement. You can join a restoration group. You can volunteer for the California Native Plant Society. You can be where your plant people are, and it doesn't have to cost a lot of money for entertainment, and you don't have to drive very far to get there. And I also challenge you to just experiment in your own space. Having your yard or your patio gives you the opportunity to really experiment and become kind of an expert in what it is that you're looking at. So here, I've only been in Mountain View for a week. I have a big patio, so I'm going to start trying to figure out what are the best native plants for pots. I mean, I have an idea, but till I actually get out there and try it myself, that's when I'm truly going to be, you know, the expert. I'm going to be the scientist of what I'm doing there on my patio. So when we're looking at the type of plants that you put in your yard, the most important thing that you should do is evaluate your situation. So number one, what are the goals that you have for your yard? Are you trying to complete a diverse habitat? Are you trying to remove, you know, one plant at a time and replace it with a native plant? You know, what is the goal? Do you have only planters and you can only plant in your planters? Determine what your goal is before you go into the nursery, because plants are expensive and they are going to increase this year. So my challenge to you is to really educate yourself on what you're looking for before you go out and buy it. It's really important that you know the right plant for the right place. So I don't know how many of you have been on calscape.org. I'm sure you all have, but this is a great place to go visit and put in your zip code and find out exactly what plants are growing in your area natively, and start familiarizing yourself with those plants, and then go buy those plants. Those are the plants that are going to thrive best in your yard. If you're trying to put a coastal plant but you live in the high desert, you're probably not going to have a lot of success. So I want you to know what is the right plants for your area and start with those plants, because for me, I want you to be successful in growing native plants so that you continue to do it over the years. Another thing to consider is the design. What kind of space do you have? Is it just a little area along the side of the house? Are you trying to create a hedge? Are you trying to put in a nice structure piece? These are all things to consider. And just to dig deeper into the design. This is one of my favorite things that my horticulture professor would teach. He would say, when you're designing a garden, you want to have thrillers, fillers, and spillers. So your thrillers are going to be your foundation and structure plants, like your manzanitas. And then you want to have filler plants, which are going to be your mid-level shrubs, maybe a Salvia apiana, something like that. And then you're going to want your ground covers or your spillers. And those are going to be the plants that are naturally going to crawl along the ground. So when preparing, before you go to the nursery, these are some of the things that are going to help you be successful. Number one, you need to know your soil type. Does everybody out there know what kind of soil that they're dealing with? There's a really quick test you can do. I would dig down about 6 inches and grab the soil in your hand. And if it clumps together like clay and doesn't fall apart, you have clay soil. And probably a lot of people are going to have that situation. And if you do, there are some special ways that you need to select carefully. You want to make sure that you're choosing plants that are tolerant of a clay soil. And just keep in mind that clay soil really holds on to water, especially in the summertime. If you're supplemental watering, say you have irrigation that's going on, you could potentially kill your native plants if you're watering them in the summertime. So if you have soil type that is clay, you really want to know what you're planting in that area. Now, if your soil just falls apart like sand, that means you're going to have to water a little bit more than you might on establishing your plants. The water just is going to pass through pass through the sand a lot quicker. However, your natives are probably going to love sandy soil. When you're looking at your yard, you need to evaluate whether you have a sunny situation or a shady situation, or maybe something that's half and half. There are certain ceanothus that like to be on a north-facing hill or a south-facing hill. These are things that you want to take note of, so that, again, you're choosing the correct plant for the area. You want to look at the size requirements of the plant. There could be I had a client one time who wanted to plant a plant that we knew was going to get of considerable size, but she wanted to put it near her pool equipment. And I asked her, why are you wanting to create yourself a problem in 2-3 years? If you put a plant that you know is going to get excessive in size, do you want to create work for yourself in the future by knowing you're going to have to do a lot of pruning, by knowing that maybe it's not the right plant to be there? You need to know, how deep the roots of the plant are going to get. If you're near driveways, that type of thing. So really know the size requirement of the plant. Know how big is this plant going to get, because I don't want you creating problems for yourself in the future. So we want to make sure that we're planting the right size plant in that area. And again, we talked about location. Where are you planting? What is your area? And then also you want to evaluate what your irrigation situation is. Do you have irrigation that's already established? Do you plan to remove the irrigation? One of the most interesting questions I will ask people when they're shopping is, what's your current irrigation like? And they don't know. A second thing is, then if they do know what they have, I said, okay, great. Tell me what the cycle is that you have the irrigation set on. Well, I don't know. If we're expecting that our landscapers who are used to tropical plants and non-native plants to know how to water our native plants, they probably don't. So you really need to be the expert on your irrigation system, and you need to be the expert on what your plants need, so that you can educate your gardener, hey, this is how I want the irrigation set, or I don't want you to set the irrigation during this type of year. But you need to know the basics of natives. So you have all the different tools that you need to make the right selection when you go to purchase plants. So we talked about location, making sure that we're choosing the right plants. Now, when you go to certain nurseries, I know there are really great nurseries out there, but there are also nurseries out there who don't know anything about natives. So don't assume because the plant is in that location that it's the right plant for your zone. Do your own research. Again, you can just look at CalScape really quick. If you know what you're looking for, you're going to go in and choose the right plants. Just don't assume that the native plants at a nursery are the correct ones for you. Healthy roots are probably the most important thing on a native plant. If you ever, when you get home, you get ready to plant and you turn the pot over and the plant roots smell funny or look weird or look like there could be a little bit of webbing in there, which could be root aphid, I want you to take the plant back and return it and get a healthy plant. If it's too root bound, you are going to want to release the roots with warm water. I know a lot of people will say that natives don't like their roots touched, but I'll tell you, being in a nursery, we cut roots all the time. The plant will go into shock for a day or two, but they usually bounce right back. So as a scientist, I feel like I have to test everything. Even if you tell me something should be done a certain way, I still want to go in and try it myself and see what happens. And healthy roots are important. You don't need to choose a big plant in a pot. In fact, you should probably choose a plant that's a little bit smaller in the pot. My mom used to always tell me when you're buying a plant that's fully flowering, it's like trying to move a pregnant woman. A pregnant woman doesn't want to be moved. So choose a plant that is about to bud or hasn't even started budding yet. What's going to happen is when you put it in your own yard, that is the point at which it's going to bloom. That's when you want to have it in your yard, rather than looking for the plants that are fully blooming and then buying those. By the time you get them in the yard, you know, those flowers are going to subside, and you might potentially put the plant in shock. So I always say, choose plants that are about to bloom rather than blooming, and just make sure that the roots are nice and healthy. Then again, we talked about size. Don't necessarily buy the plant for the size. If I understand that sometimes you just want to see like you're making progress in your yard, so maybe buying the 15-gallon is the way to go. I honestly would buy a smaller sized plant. Like, I think 1 gallons are ideal. They really will catch up to the bigger plants very quick. There's this saying, the first year they sleep, the second year they creep, and the third year they leap. At the third year point, the plants really will kind of level out as far as size. So I'd say, don't splurge on the big plant unless you really, really want to. It's ultimately, in the long run, it's probably not going to make big difference. And then you're going to be saving some money that way as well. So this is a diagram that I love from the Tree of Life nursery. They do a beautiful job explaining the proper way to plant a native. Now, I'll tell you, I'm a bit of a lazy gardener, and there are certain things that I do and I put them off to the side. But if you look at this diagram, it really shows you very detailed of how about how they want a plant, a native plant planted. So what you want to start with is a hole that is twice as wide as the pot and half as deep as the pot. And then what I like to do is to pre-water the hole. And the reason I'm doing this is because I'm wanting to encourage the roots to grow down. When you're just surface watering, what you're going to do is train the roots to grow up. And if we want a plant to be drought tolerant, it's important that we train the roots to go down. So you want to do deep waterings, and that will encourage the plant to go down. Also another thing, if you've ever watered your garden and stood there with a hose and watered for about 10 minutes, a fun experiment to do is to take your garden shovel and go in there and dig down about 6 inches and see how far the water really penetrated down into the soil. You're going to be shocked to see that it probably didn't go down more than about 2 inches. That's really not training roots to go down. It's important that you water deeply and slowly, and that will allow the water to percolate down into the soil the way that it should. So just keep that in mind. If you're hand watering, you're probably not watering at the depth that you think you're watering. So take the time to dig a little hole and see for yourself, and then you'll start to understand, okay, this is my yard, and this is how long it takes to water correctly. Once you do that, after that, you'll be set, because you'll know exactly what your plant needs, what your garden needs, and what your soil type needs in order to properly hydrate your plant. So after I've pre-watered, I put the plant into the hole, and I protect the crown. I don't want to have any soil covering up the crown of the plant. You want to make sure that air can move freely around the crown of the plant. And you don't want your mulch pushed up into the crown of the plant as well. You want to keep that into sort of like a berm area around the plant. And this is really important if you're planting on a slope. You really want to make sure you're creating a sort of flat berm, so that water has a place to settle down onto the plant. Without that berm, the water will just kind of slide off the hill. So then I'll go through and I'll water again. And I like to add mulch, especially in hotter areas. So I was living in Fallbrook, and it was extremely hot. And I found my plants I was very successful at not having to water the plants, and my plants did really well with mulch. I used a gorilla hair mulch. Now, over time, your plants are going to start dropping their own leaves and naturally create their own mulch. So that will happen over time. But because my particular yard was very hot, I really wanted to have that mulch down on the ground. So let's talk a little bit more about irrigation. It's important that you know what your irrigation schedule is and why are you setting it to the schedule that you're setting it. Now, when you're establishing plants, you are going to need to water your plants maybe once a week. Now, is it once a week or is it twice a week? I don't know. I mean, you can ask me, but I don't know. I'm not in your yard. I'm not the one digging down into the dirt. I'm not, seeing what your weather patterns are, whether it's been hot, whether it's been cold. So you need to go out and make that analysis for yourself. Kind of the best bet is to mimic what Mother Nature does. Now, Mother Nature here in Southern California gives us rain in the winter and sometimes a little bit in the spring, and that's about it. So if you imagine that native plants are acclimated to those same sort of conditions. So it doesn't make sense to have an irrigation system going off all year long on your plants. So that's something you need to think about. If you have an irrigation system that's watering your native plants, you're probably going to see your native plants suffer, potentially shorten their lifespan. So try to mimic what Mother Nature does, and you're generally always going to be okay. And again, like I've said several times, my favorite thing to do is just analyze what's going on. Take your shovel and dig down and see what exactly is going on, what's being watered, how long is it being watered. Once you do this, you'll know exactly what your yard is doing, and you should be very successful at planting natives. So when looking at natives, there's one thing that natives put off in the fall and winter is that puts off seed heads for many different species to feed off of in the wintertime when there's not a lot out there for them to survive on. So what I like to say is, rather than trimming those back, and sometimes they don't look as nice as you like them to, but consider the fact that when you're leaving the seeds out there on your plants in the winter, you are giving birds and such food to eat. So I like to wait until the spring to do that. I like to wait until it looks like all the seeds have been taken off, and then I'll go and I will cut off the dead seed heads. The spring is a good time to do some light pruning to your plants. You're going to get your new growth. So it's a good time to cut back anything that you're trying to trim back, or anything that looks like dead wood. You can cut it off now. And one other thing about just maintenance for when summer rolls around is that you want to know when your plants are going to go dormant and when your plants are going to lose their leaves. If you know this, you won't be scared, or you won't think that you've killed the plant when all of a sudden it's lost all its leaves. What the plant is doing is just going into sort of survival mode to deal with the heat of the summer, and it's perfectly okay. Some plants like monkey flowers, you can trim down. We would at the nursery trim them down to about 6 inches, and that would give them a little bit of time, and then they would just pop back and rebloom again. So each plant is going to be treated a little differently, but once you kind of get the idea of what they're supposed to look like and when to prune them, maintenance is going to be a breeze. So these are just some ideas of insect damage that can occur. These are all photographs that I took at the nursery. I really don't think, and I look when I go hiking all the time to try and find examples of insect damage in nature, and I'll tell you, I hardly ever see it. I certainly don't see it in this heavy amount. When you're working at a nursery, we're growing things in sort of a monocrop. We have thousands of one species all in the same place. So that unfortunately makes them very susceptible to, if one plant gets insects, and in fact, insect infestation, it will end up on many of the plants. So here's some different insect damage, aphids. Now, if you have milkweed, you don't want to be using anything to remove the aphids other than water. Remember, if you spray your milkweed, you are also spraying the future monarch butterflies by killing the larvae from the insecticide. So don't use anything on your milkweed. This last photo is gall created by aphids, and it's on manzanitas. Again, I almost never see this in the wild. This was a big problem at the nursery. We would see gall all over the manzanitas, and it's unfortunate because we do have to spray for it. But if I had this in my own yard, I honestly would just leave it alone. I do believe that it will just take care of itself. And honestly, it's kind of pretty from far away. Just it looks very red and vibrant. Some other things you might see, this is cochineal on cactus. I see this in the wild all the time. Those are actually red dye insects that live under that white foamy protection layer. The indigenous people would use that as red dye. You can see sort of the black cochineal escaping when I was spraying them. So this, unfortunately, if you do get on one of your plants at home, I would treat it early and treat it quickly. It spreads quickly, and it's one of those things that are hard to get rid of once you have. You'll see it in the wild. They will kind of infect the entire plant, and it's pretty unsightly. So if you do see that, you do want to treat it with a toothbrush and insecticidal soap when it's very cool out. This is a little hard to see, but this is a chalk dudleya with, you can see thrip damage. You can see the leaves look a little warped. The petals look a little warped looking, and that's not what they should look like. So unfortunately, that's just one of the things that affect a nursery. But again, I've yet to ever see that in nature. So To avoid pathogens in your garden, one of the best things you can do is just be preventative. You have tools. You want to make sure that you're cleaning the tools. And I know we all have plenty of disinfectant laying around. I would use that old disinfectant you have laying around and put that on a paper towel and clean off the edges of your tools before you put them away. And in between plants, if you're ever cutting a plant that looks like it's been infected, be really careful to clean it between cutting another plant, because you could spread what's going on with one plant to another. When your plants are healthy, they're automatically going to be able to fight off pathogens. They have mycorrhizae in their roots that really helps keep them healthy. Most native plant nurseries do pre-treat their plant roots with mycorrhizae. So that will ensure that you have a nice, healthy plant. If you're watering in the summertime, that's one of the quickest ways to injure a plant. And that's because those warm roots do affect the mycorrhizae, and then it does allow pathogens to attack the mycorrhizae, and in that case hurts your roots. So you really want to avoid the summer watering. You want to make sure that you have nice, healthy plants. Use clean tools, and that's really going to help you with spreading any diseases in your garden. This is just a quick little description of the restoration project that we did out in the Salton Sea. These were all the trees, the native trees that we had planted with the endophytes and the salinity and control group, and we planted them out on this exposed playa you could see. But all of this, this was all an invasive species back here that they actually had to bulldoze out before the trees could be planted. But as we were talking about how important it is to be part of our community, what I really loved about this project is it brought so many groups together. The tribe, the California Conservation Corps, was a group of young 20-year-old kids that were out there working on this environmental project. We had all of these, here's me doing some measurements here while there's a fire going on in the background. We had all these groups involved in this big community action plan to restore restore this playa. And it was such an amazing feeling to be part of this group and how many people it took to carry out this big project. So I encourage you, if you ever feel down and out or feel depressed or feel stressed because of things that are going on around us, the best thing you could do is just go spend time in your garden. Spend time just talking to your plants. Let them talk back to you. Feel the community that's building up in the garden. The more natives you plant, you're going to start to see wildlife in your garden. You're going to feel like you're doing something for the environment. It's going to give you such a sense of accomplishment when you start to see the wildlife come back into your garden. And I encourage you to get out into your community and get to know other plant nerds. We all love talking about the same things. We all love learning from each other. There's a lot of really great Facebook groups on native plant propagation. The California Native Plant Society has a Facebook group as well. Every single day you can be learning about a little bit about native plants every day. But I just would love you to get out and just get into your garden and just start experimenting, because being a scientist, we don't know all the answers. We go out and we do the research and we look at the different conditions within the area and we look at how they all come together and affect each other. And that's how we ultimately determine what's going on in the garden. So if you just have these basic ideas down and then go out and select your plants, I think that it's going to make you a much more successful gardener. So I thank you so much. If you want to go see or come see me in person, I will be I will be down in Southern California on March 19th doing a basic propagation class over at Walter Anderson Poway. March 19th at 9 a.m. And at Louis Nursery in Menifee, I'll actually be doing a propagation workshop where you'll have all the supplies, and we'll be doing cuttings and physically doing propagation over there on May 14th at 12 p.m. If you have any questions or you want to reach out to me, I'm Midlife Farm Girl on Instagram, and that's my email address. There's to any questions you might have, or if you want to chat about something that we can try and figure out together, I'm more than happy to help. Or if you want to see where I'm going to be next talking, my schedule will always be posted up on my Instagram, and you can follow the weird and crazy things I'm doing out here as a scientist in Mountain View. So with that, I give you back the floor, Christine. Does anybody have any questions? I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Renee, for your presentation. So far, we don't have any questions in the chat, but if people have questions, if you want to unmute yourself and ask Renee directly, or if you prefer to just type your question in the chat, that would be fine as well.
Renee, I'd like to ask a question.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go for it.
Okay. You're talking about, when you're talking about watering, you're talking about the difference between established plants versus getting a plant established, especially like in the summer, because Tree of Life gives a schedule of
Yes, they do.
Once a month.
Yes,
of once a month for 3 days in a row, which is what I tend to follow.
So I'm going to just give my disclaimer.
Okay.
I will buck if you give me a list of rules. I'm going to probably break all of them and see what happens. And then I'm going to determine whether or not those make sense to me. So people say don't plant in the summer. I planted my entire garden in the summer. I think I lost 2 plants.
Oh, wow.
I had a customer come in and wanted to buy the biggest Sambuca mexicana that she could find in the yard. And the roots were growing down into the ground, and we had to rip it up with the roots. We had to literally rip it out. And it was a huge plant, but she thought, if I put this in my yard, it will thrive, and it's big, and I'm getting it for $1 gallon price. So guess what I did after work? I did the exact same thing. I brought that plant home and I planted it in my garden. And you know what happened? That plant died. So I do not recommend, I don't think it was a root issue. Just don't go and buy the biggest plant that's overgrown in a 1 gallon and think it's going to be as successful as just planting your standard size 1 gallon. Now, whenever you have plants sitting in a pot, you will have to water more. The more soil you have on a plant, the more apt the plant is able to manage its water. So obviously, if you have in a pot like this, it's going to need a lot more water than if you had a pot like this. So all of those things are things you should consider. I suggest getting a moisture meter. They are amazing. It allows you to go down into the ground 6 inches, and it will tell you what the water level is. And again, I know they do publish that wonderful list of what you should do, but I'm telling you, people in Menifee are going to have a very different water schedule than somebody in San Juan Capistrano. And I know this because I lived in Dana Point, which is very close to San Juan Capistrano. So I don't want to say I disagree with what they're saying. They're giving some sort of guideline, but don't ever take the guideline and say that's the rule, because it's never the rule. Everything is going to have to flex based on your current conditions. If I was working in a pathology lab and you sent me something and said, tell me what's wrong with my plant, I would get on the phone with you and I'd ask you 30 questions about what's going on in your garden before I could even make a guess. And even at that point, it's still my most educated guess. So I guess for me, it's frustrating when I see somebody post a picture on one of the Facebook groups, and we all see this. Everybody, tell me what's wrong with my plant. And 16 people come back with their expert opinion on what's wrong with that plant. Yet they've maybe asked 1, maybe 2 questions. Sorry, my cat is wanting to get in here. 1 or 2 questions about what's going on there. There are so many things that could be going on there. You could have ants, you could have gophers, you could have a pathogen. It could be the wrong watering. It could be so many different things. And I never want to give someone an answer and say, yep, that's what it is. I talk back to the client and I say, what is going on in your yard? I want them to tell me, what kind of soil do you have? What kind of sun do you have? How often have you been watering? Did you check to see if the plant was moist? Did you overwater? Remember, roots need to breathe. I can tell you, I planted many plants in my yard, of which I maybe gave 3 to 4 waterings. So maybe 1 watering a week for a month in the summer. Stopped because I got lazy or bored or too busy at work and couldn't make it home in time to take care of my plants. And those plants are absolutely thriving. That doesn't follow any of the rules of the Tree of Life guide. So I'm not saying the guide is wrong, but what I'm saying is be your own judge. Dig down there and see what's going. And if you, hey, the soil seems nice and moist, don't water, doesn't need it. It doesn't need to be, it doesn't need to be soaked. I mean, I just, yeah, long answer.
Yeah.
Again, I don't like to give precise answers because I think it's really difficult, but yes, take those as a guideline, but definitely tweak them to make sense to you.
That's great. And I did just get a very long water meter so that I could go really deep.
They're
so
amazing, right?
Tell. Yeah, I'm really pleased with it to figure things out, because it is difficult to figure out.
Right.
And amazing how much we think it's really deep in the ground, and it's not.
And what about houseplants? You will save your houseplants' lives with a 6-inch moisture meter. I could not master the houseplant until I got one. I finally got the watering under control.
I have one more real quick question. What kind of fertilizer do you put in for native plants in pots?
Okay, so because I am going to become the native plant potting expert, but I am not right now, there are simple things I would consider. So we don't, or generally, our nursery as a rule, and again, following my Mother Nature principle, I don't believe in fertilizing native plants. With that being said, when you put anything in a pot over time, any nutrition or organic matter that's in the pot is going to degrade. If it looked like my plant was suffering in the pot, I would start to look at, what do I think is wrong with my plant? Could it need to be moved into a bigger pot? That would be the first thing I would think, just because native plants have very large root systems for a lot of the plants. So the first thing I would consider is that, does it need more space? If you think your watering is correct and you think it still has plenty of space, maybe try a little bit of fertilizer and see how the plant reacts.
So no suggestions on a particular fertilizer, but just something mild.
Now Tree of Life will suggest, and they do this with their planting, I believe they use a bone meal when they plant their plants. And that's great. And if that works for them, fantastic. But I think just as many native people will tell you no fertilizer at all. I would use a mix that is more of a desert mix. There are companies that actually make native plant mix. I would suggest that you make sure that the plant is treated with mycorrhizae before I would suggest using a fertilizer. But I would plant it without and just see what happens.
Okay, thank you so very much. Awesome, enjoying.
Renee, I want to mention that Theodore Payne recommends for container plants a slow release fertilizer once a year.
Are they using Osmocote?
They didn't specify. No, it was organic. So a slow release organic fertilizer, but it's like 1/4 strength that they use for their container plants. And I think they fertilize once a year, if that makes sense. So they're not overdoing it, but they recognize that
It's very,
native-
whatever they
natives-
use, very
Yeah.
light. Yeah, and
Yeah,
that's
very
probably,
light.
if you're feeling like you want, and you know what I would do, honestly? Do one plant without anything and another plant with organic fertilizer
Right.
and see
Yeah.
if there's a difference.
Try it out.
Yeah, try it out. You can always add organic fertilizer after the fact, but the best way would be one this way, and see what happens.
Right.
Yeah.
We do have a question in the chat. Would you say that the maintenance program for the conventional landscape doesn't work well for California native plants? That is a formal hedge of ceanothus or trimming shrubby toyon to a single trunk tree.
Now, I know people do more trimming on, some people will do more trimming on natives, and you can do it on some of the species. Some people do want a hedge and they're going to trim it that way. I feel like you should learn to love natives for the way that they're meant to be, which isn't a very structured feel. The overall design and the landscaping, natives don't lend itself to that, you know, where you see this traditional shaped hedge. There are plants you can trim to be hedges, and people do interesting things to trees. There are some manzanitas that you can, I forget what it's called. It's a French way of like bending.
Oh, Escalier.
Yes, you can do that with some manzanitas. So yeah, you can do some things to natives. Yeah, why not? But I would say if you can just let them be the way that they're supposed to be, again, the Mother Nature. I like to keep them the way that they're supposed to be, but you know, yeah, you can do some trimming to them. You can create hedges. Some natives will make great hedges, like coffeeberry, great hedge.
Mm-hmm. Someone else had a question. Any thoughts on fertilizing California native plants living in containers? Oh, well, you already addressed that. Okay,
Yeah.
so good.
So we're all going to try half and half, and we're all going to reconvene.
Someone else had a question about using worm castings as soil amendment for native plants.
So, okay, I love worm castings. They're fantastic. It's a great organic fertilizer, but why are we using it on the native plants? I've had a few people complain that they say their soil is absolutely terrible, and the topsoil was removed off of the top of their dirt, some excavation, that kind of thing. If you were going to add something, keep it minimal. Yeah, a minimal compost, worm casting, these are all great. Are you trying to change the consistency of a clay soil? What is it that you're trying to do with the worm casting? If it's just for fertilizer, okay, fine. It's a very light fertilizer. I actually did my grad research on vermicompost, of all strange things. But again, under the principle of, do native plants need fertilization? I mean, no, they've been living here since before we've been here, and they like our crappy soil. So we don't have to change it. I guess you can if you want, and that would be light enough.
Just from personal experience, when we remodeled our house, in the front yard on one side was where they cut the tile and mix the cement. And as you know, construction people just kind of dump everything where they
see a little toxic situation going on.
Yeah, so I did have problems initially when I put in a native garden, that some things just would not thrive. And but I will tell you what, salvias, if you've got a soil that just things just aren't growing there, salvias usually do really well. And saltbush is another one that can recondition the soil for people who have that kind of situation. So
saltbush can grow in the really lousy soil, the toxic soil out over at the Salton Sea. Saltbush.
Yeah, and it's a a great habitat bush for birds. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you have a more like an area like that that's challenging, look for native plants that are salt tolerant. Those are going to be your plants that really can tolerate bad conditions. But in a condition like that, that's where I'd maybe consider amending the soil, where you just know something is not right.
right. So Justin Daniel, who is our president of our CNPS chapter, he's put in the chat, in pots and containers, the most important thing, in my honest opinion, is soil temperature. Roots should stay cool all year and watered sufficiently. I avoid pots with darker hues and add something like dichondra or moss to monitor the surface water and provide shade coverage.
Mm-hmm. Love it. Yep.
Absolutely. Roots do not like dark pots at all.
Mm-hmm. And it's a shame that all like the entire native or the entire nursery business, not native specifically, they all use black pots. And it's unfortunate because it really is tricky keeping them cool all summer long.
It must be cheaper to use black than anything else.
I'm sure. Absolutely. I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. But I've experimented also with putting like a layer of mulch on top of my potted plants, and definitely made a big difference. Just like in my garden, just really was able to just minimize the amount of watering that I do. I'm a lazy gardener. Let's face it. So I'm going to try and make the conditions just right so I can just set it and forget it. Once I figured it out, I just, I like to go and have my coffee out in my garden and just kind of do my meditation and let my plants tell me what's going on. And I feel like when there's something wrong with your plant, they tell you, they show you. And if you're not out there every day, just kind of spending time with the plants and with your little special space that you've created for yourself, you don't know the difference between when your plant's happy and when it's not happy. But I'll tell you, some of the most enjoyable moments of my life have been when you just sit out in the middle of a field of poppies or in the middle of a field of lettuce and just listen, and you start to hear the insects chewing on things, and you can hear the grasshoppers jump around. Like, you're really hyper aware of the ecology and the biodiversity, and that's such a cool thing. So if you can create that in your own yard, where you just have a place of peace and quiet, and you could disconnect from the world and connect to your plants, they'll teach you more than you'll ever know. And just get in touch with just get connected to your community. Just get out and get to know people and talk to each other about plants. It's just such a thing we could talk about all night long, right?
Oh, absolutely. All right. So someone had a question for the Latin name for saltbush, and it is according to Calscape, it is Extraplex californica for California saltbush instead of the Atraplex. So genre is Atraplex. Okay, so thank you, Justin, for that. I am not big on Latin names yet. I'm still learning. So
you'll never know all of them.
I know. Gosh darn it, they keep changing it every couple of years to something new. So anyways, anyone else have questions?
Yes, I was wondering, can you hear me?
I can.
I was wondering, I was thinking of putting plants indoors, and I don't know how many natives would work well that way.
Anybody else have any experience? I'm gonna vote no, just based on the fact that they generally all prefer a lot of sunshine.
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
Yeah, but again, experiment, if there's something that is maybe half and half and you have a really sunny window, I mean, you could try it. I don't think they would do well just based on the conditions that they want. Yeah, I mean, you're really taking them out of their element.
I was thinking maybe of the, oh, shoot. Cactus-like.
It's like, I wonder, like, could you take a San Diego barrel cactus and keep it in a really, really sunny window in your kitchen? I mean, I bet that'd be okay for some time.
I'm wondering if some of your shade loving plants wouldn't do well, you know, like maidenhair, for instance. Especially if you had it in a bathroom where you get lots of moisture from showering or bathing.
Yeah, it would, you know, it would be really interesting to see if anybody has success with that, but that's a frequently asked question. And I haven't heard of anyone doing it or trying it, so.
So Karen Glass has a question. She says, in new plants, how long should the root ball be kept moist?
Well, my version or Tree of Life's version. You know, so Tree of Life says you should keep the root ball continuously moist. In my opinion, I think it should get just almost dry, and then you water again. That's sort of how we treat them in the nursery in the 1 gallon pots. You know, they will get fairly dry, like you can really feel the pot lighten up. And then we water them. Sometimes it's daily water, sometimes in the heat, it's you know, twice a day. That's where I really like the moisture meter, because you can actually see the meter go down to just, you know, where you might have 30% or 20% moisture, and then you can water it again. But again, I feel like it's in a little bit of an overstatement for how much water they really need during establishment. And I do feel like they establish faster than the guidelines say. And again, that could be a lot of variation based on the plant. I'm sure tree species take longer to establish than, say, your shrubs or your lower growing plants. Again, and when you start to see new growth on there, that's when I kind of start to relax. Okay, I see new growth. It you know, looks happy and healthy. So what I'm doing is working. I can start to step back a little bit. So that's kind of the way I look at it.
Someone had a question about Dudleya indoor next to a bright window.
I think you could get away with it. If there was something I would try, it would be a San Diego barrel cactus or a Dudleya, but make sure that you're using well draining cactus soil mix, because they really don't like a lot of moisture. But yeah, I think you could try that one, sure.
All right. Justin Daniels says bonsai with caprices is the only thing he has gotten to work inside. So just
native plant bonsais are super cool. Has anybody been to the Safari Wild Animal Park? They have a bonsai section. Oh my gosh, they have some coast live oaks, some incredible bonsai native species in there. If you ever get a chance, check it out. Very cool.
All right.
And what, another trick too is you could, if you like bonsai, I had a customer teach me this. What he does is he buys like the salvias or any species that have been in the 1 gallon pot way too long and have gotten the really thick trunk. Now, from the nursery perspective, those are unsellable for us. We would never send them to a retailer that way. But this guy would specifically come and buy those ones that were very old in the pot and had a very old twisty trunk. And so I took some of those and put them in pots, and they look really cool because they look just like bonsai, but they're salvias.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, any more questions from the crowd here? Oh. Okay, well, I want to thank you so much, Renee, for coming tonight and sharing with us and lots of good information. And again, I want to remind everyone about the upcoming garden tour, April 9th. Hope to see you there. And stay tuned. I'll be sending out a newsletter to the garden committee for upcoming events. We do have some fun stuff planned. Just as an aside, we are doing a pop-up native plant maintenance workshop at Greg Rubin's house. And unfortunately, it was only limited to 10 people. And it actually filled up in 45 minutes. So we didn't realize it was going to be such a popular workshop. So we do plan to offer it again. I think Justin Daniel has volunteered his yard, so we might look at that. So anyway, stay in touch. And again, Renee, thank you so much for coming and presenting tonight.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
Yes.
I look forward to teaching you guys all about the natives in pots after I figure it out here in my new house.
Continued. We'll bring you back when you have that expertise.
I'll come back with everything I tried, what worked and what didn't.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, everybody. If you have any questions, please just reach out. There's my contact info.